My mother snatched the crystal champagne flute right out of my hand in front of the entire bridal boutique. She looked me up and down with absolute disgust and told me my greasy chef vibe would ruin the atmosphere of my sister's high society wedding. I just stood there quietly. 2 months later, she found my own wedding video trending worldwide, and the guest list made her pass out cold. My name is Naomi, and I am 33 years old. I was standing in the middle of a luxury bridal salon on Rodeo Drive, trying to process the sheer cruelty of what my mother Sylvia had just said to me. The plush white carpets and glittering chandeliers of the exclusive boutique felt suffocating. I had spent the last decade building my career from the ground up, working grueling hours in commercial kitchens to become a highly sought-after private chef for celebrity clients in Los Angeles. I owned a massive elite hospitality group, but I kept my wealth entirely private. To my mother, I was just a glorified cook who smelled like roasted garlic and failure. She leaned in close, her heavy designer perfume masking the scent of the champagne she had just ripped from my grasp. "It is better if you just stay home, Naomi," she hissed, her voice dripping with venom. "Donovan comes from real money. His family is incredibly prominent in the real estate world. We cannot have you showing up looking like the hired help and embarrassing your sister. You understand, right? Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit the like button and subscribe if you have ever been treated like a second-class citizen by your own blood. Trust me, you will want to hear how I handled this ultimate betrayal." Right on cue, the heavy velvet dressing room doors swung open. My younger sister, Brittany, stepped out onto the viewing pedestal, wearing a breathtaking custom gown covered in intricate Chantilly lace and hand-sewn Swarovski crystals. At 30 years old, Brittany had never worked a single day in her life, but she carried herself like a billionaire as. She spun around admiring her reflection in the floor-toe-ceiling mirrors, while our mother clapped in absolute delight. "Oh honey, you look exactly like royalty," Sylvia gushed, wiping a fake tear from her powdered cheek. Brittany looked over her shoulder at me and smiled a sickly sweet, condescending smile. "It is absolute perfection," she declared. The salon consultant beamed and politely mentioned that since the gown was a custom rush order, it brought the total to a staggering $15,000. Without missing a beat, Brittany turned fully toward me and held out her manicured hand. "Well, Naomi, hand over the black card," she said casually, as if she were asking me to pass the salt at the dinner table. "Consider it your sisterly duty to make sure my big day is flawless since you will not be there to celebrate with us anyway." The audacity hung in the air, heavy and toxic. This was the exact dynamic of our family, plain and simple. I was not worthy of an invitation to the most important event of her life, but I was fully expected to finance it. For years, I had been their silent, limitless ATM. I paid off my parents' mortgage when my dad made terrible financial decisions. I funded Brittany's luxury vacations because she claimed she needed to find herself in Europe. I even bought the very designer purse my mother was currently clutching. They deeply despised my profession, but they absolutely loved the cash it brought into their pockets. The bridal consultant looked back and forth between us, clearly uncomfortable, but waiting for me to pull out my wallet. I looked at Brittany standing there in her $15,000 dress, expecting me to just bow down and pay her way as usual. Then I looked at my mother, who was glaring at me, silently, demanding my total compliance. For the first time in my entire life, the heavy fog of family obligation completely lifted. I reached into my bag, not for my credit card, but to grab my car keys. I offered my sister a bright, warm smile and snapped my purse shut. "If I am not invited, I do not buy the gift," I said, my voice perfectly calm and steady. The silence in the boutique was absolutely deafening. Brittany's jaw dropped open in pure shock. Sylvia's face turned a violent shade of crimson. "What did you just say to me?" my mother shrieked, her voice echoing terribly off the mirrored walls. "You selfish, ungrateful brat. Hand over that card right now." I did not say another word to either of them. I simply turned on my heel and walked out the glass doors of the boutique, leaving them to figure out how to pay for the extravagant dress they could not possibly afford. The cool California breeze hit my face as I walked to my car, feeling lighter than I had in years. As soon as I slid into the driver's seat, I pulled out my phone and dialed a very important number. "Hello, the Plaza Hotel Events Management," I said as the engine roared to life. "Yes, this is the anonymous benefactor for the Brittany and Donovan wedding next month. I am calling to officially withdraw my $100,000 venue sponsorship immediately. Please bill the bride directly for the full amount." 2 days passed in complete silence. I was in the middle of my state-of-the-art culinary test kitchen in downtown Los Angeles, finalizing a 5-course truffle tasting menu for a prominent tech executive. The rhythmic chopping of my knife against the wooden block was the only sound in the room until my phone started vibrating furiously on the stainless steel counter. The caller ID flashed my sister's name. I let it ring. It stopped, then immediately started buzzing again. Over the next 10 minutes, she called 12 times in a row. Finally, she left a voicemail. I put down my chef knife, wiped my hands on a pristine white towel, and tapped play on the speaker phone. Brittany was absolutely hysterical. Her voice was shrill and echoing as if she was pacing around a large empty room. Naomi picked up the phone. She shrieked, her voice cracking with manic rage. "The events coordinator at the Plaza Hotel just called me. The anonymous corporate sponsor completely backed out of my wedding contract. The hotel is demanding the $100,000 balance in full by this Friday, or they are giving my ballroom to someone else. I know you had something to do with this, Naomi. I know you called someone there and spread lies about Donovan's family. You are so violently jealous of me and my high society wedding that you had to ruin it just because you are a spinster cook. You are a bitter, pathetic loser." The voicemail clicked off. I just smiled and took a sip of my sparkling water. She actually believed I had enough free time to orchestrate a smear campaign against her instead of realizing the obvious truth. I was the anonymous sponsor. I was the one who had quietly wired the massive deposit to the hotel 6 months ago so she could have her dream venue. She had never once stopped to wonder why a random luxury hospitality group would suddenly sponsor a middle-class wedding. She just assumed she deserved it because she always got exactly what she wanted. Before I could even delete the voicemail, my phone chimed with a text message. This time it was from my father, Richard. The message was short and dripping with his usual demanding authority. "Get to the house right now. Your sister is having a panic attack because of your petty jealousy. You have humiliated this family for the last time. Come over here and fix this mess immediately." My father had always been a deeply passive man when it came to earning a living, but he was fiercely aggressive when it came to protecting his golden child. For years, he had turned a blind eye to how my mother treated me. As long as I kept quietly paying off the debts, his failed business ventures kept racking up. He truly believed he could summon me, like an obedient dog, to pull out my checkbook and make Brittany stop crying. I untied my apron and draped it over the kitchen island. I did not feel the usual heavy knot of anxiety in my stomach that used to accompany my parents' demands. I felt absolutely nothing but a cold, sharp clarity. I walked out of the test kitchen and took the private elevator up to my penthouse apartment. I went straight to the reinforced steel safe hidden in my home office. After punching in the code, I pulled out a heavy, thick black leather folder. This folder was my ultimate insurance policy. Inside was every single bank statement, wire transfer, and cleared check I had ever issued to my family over the past 8 years. There was the $50,000 wire transfer that saved my parents' house from foreclosure when the bank was ready to evict them. There were the itemized receipts for Brittany's 3-week vacation to Greece under the guise of finding herself. There were the monthly statements for the luxury cars they leased to keep up appearances in their neighborhood, which I paid for every single month. Every single dime they had drained from my accounts was meticulously documented, highlighted, and securely bound in this single folder. I walked down to the private garage and got into my car, tossing the heavy folder onto the passenger seat. The drive to my parents' suburban home took exactly 45 minutes. When I pulled into the driveway, I saw Donovan's flashy but leased sports car parked haphazardly on the front lawn. They were all inside waiting to ambush me. They were waiting to scream at me until I broke down, apologized, and handed over the money to fix my sister's ruined aesthetic. I turned off the engine and picked up the thick leather folder. I walked up the paved walkway to the front door, not to beg for their forgiveness, but to serve them a heavy dose of reality. I pushed open the heavy mahogany front door and stepped into the foyer. The house was dead silent, but the tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife. I walked into the formal living room and found them waiting for me exactly as I had pictured. The setup looked like a poorly rehearsed courtroom drama. My father, Richard, was standing near the fireplace with his hands on his hips, trying to project an air of absolute authority. My mother, Sylvia, sat rigidly on the pristine white sofa with her arms tightly crossed over her chest. Brittany was pacing back and forth near the large bay window, dabbing her eyes with a tissue to play the role of the devastated victim. "Sit down, Naomi," my father commanded, pointing to a single accent chair positioned directly across from them. "We are not playing any more of your childish games today. You have caused enough damage, and now you are going to fix it." I did not sit. I remained standing perfectly still, holding the thick leather folder against my side. "I am not staying long enough to sit down," I replied, my voice completely level. "Say whatever it is you brought me here to say." My father took a step forward, his face hardening. "Your sister is getting married in exactly 1 month to a man from a highly respected family. The Plaza Hotel requires the remaining $100,000 balance by Friday because of your petty little stunt with the event coordinator. We know you do not have that kind of cash sitting in your bank account from flipping burgers or whatever it is you do, but you do own that little condo downtown." He paused as if he was about to bestow some brilliant financial wisdom upon me. "I called a broker this morning," he continued. "The downtown real estate market is booming right now. You're going to take out a second mortgage on that condo. You can easily pull out the equity to cover the venue cost. You will sign the paperwork by tomorrow, and you will wire the money directly to the hotel. It is the absolute least you can do to make up for your disgusting behavior at the bridal boutique." I stared at him for a long moment. He was completely serious. He actually expected me to put my own home at risk to finance a one-night party for a sister who treated me like dirt. Before I could even respond, my mother uncrossed her arms and leaned forward, glaring at me with eyes full of pure malice. "And let me make one thing crystal clear to you, Naomi," she spat. "If you refuse to do this, if you ruin your sister's wedding day, we are entirely done with you. You will be officially disowned. We will call our estate lawyer first thing Monday morning and write you completely out of our will. Every single asset we have, every penny we have built over our lifetime will go exclusively to Brittany. You will not see a single dime of our estate." For a second, the room was completely silent. Then I started to laugh. It started as a soft chuckle, but quickly grew into a full, genuine laugh that echoed off the high ceilings of the living room. My father looked deeply confused, while my mother looked like she was ready to explode. Brittany stopped pacing and stared at me like I had lost my mind. "Write me out of your will," I asked, wiping a tear of amusement from my eye. "What exactly are you threatening to leave me, Sylvia? Your massive credit card debt." I stepped forward and slammed the heavy black leather folder down onto the glass coffee table. The loud smack made all 3 of them jump. I flipped the cover open and started sliding the meticulously highlighted documents across the glass surface like I was dealing a deck of cards. "Are you going to leave me the second mortgage on this very house that I paid off to stop your foreclosure 3 years ago?" I asked, sliding a bank notice toward my father. "Or maybe you plan to leave me the monthly lease agreements for those 2 luxury cars sitting in the driveway that are automatically drafted from my business account every single month. Look at the papers, Richard, look at them." My father looked down at the documents, his face suddenly draining of all color. Brittany slowly walked over and peered at the highlighted numbers. "What is this?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "Mom, are we broke? Your net worth is roughly negative $300,000, I explained coldly, staring directly at my mother. "You do not own this house. The bank owns it. And the only reason you are not living in a motel right now is because I have been quietly subsidizing your pathetic attempt at a wealthy lifestyle for the past 8 years. You have absolutely nothing to leave me. Your will is a worthless piece of paper." My mother stared at the financial documents, exposing her massive web of lies. Her grand illusion of superiority was completely shattered right in front of her golden child. Her face turned a violent shade of purple. She let out a sharp guttural scream of rage, stood up from the sofa, and marched directly up to me. She raised her hand and slapped me hard across the left side of my face. The sharp crack echoed through the silent room. My cheek burned instantly, but I did not stumble. I did not even blink. I slowly turned my head back to look her dead in the eyes. The absolute terror in her expression showed that she instantly regretted crossing that physical line. "You just lost your retirement fund," I said, my voice dangerously quiet. I turned my back on them, left the folder of their financial ruins sitting on the coffee table, and walked straight out the front door into the bright afternoon sun. The bright afternoon sun temporarily blinded me as I walked briskly down the paved driveway, leaving the heavy oak door of my parents' house wide open behind me. My left cheek was still throbbing with a dull heat from my mother's slap. But honestly, I had never felt more liberated in my entire life. I was finally free from their endless cycle of financial abuse and emotional manipulation. I reached the edge of the manicured lawn just as a matte black luxury SUV rolled quietly up to the curb. The tinted driver's side window glided down and the door pushed open. Kendrick stepped out onto the pavement. He was 35 years old, tall, broad-shouldered, and effortlessly handsome. To anyone else on that suburban street, he probably looked like just another regular guy running errands. He was dressed in his usual weekend uniform, which consisted of a plain black cotton t-shirt, dark wash denim jeans, and a pair of clean white sneakers. There were no flashy designer logos, no heavy gold chains, and no outward displays of obnoxious wealth. But beneath that casual exterior, Kendrick was a fiercely intelligent African-American tech mogul and a heavyweight music producer who commanded boardrooms and recording studios across the globe. He was a self-made billionaire. He was also the man I was going to marry in just a few short weeks. He walked around the hood of the car to greet me, his warm smile instantly fading the moment his eyes locked onto my face. He stopped dead in his tracks, his dark eyes narrowed dangerously as he took in the bright red handprint blooming across my cheek. "Who did that?" he asked, his voice dropping an entire octave. The protective intensity in his tone was terrifyingly calm. I shook my head and reached out to grab his hand. "It does not matter anymore," I told him softly, rubbing my thumb over his knuckles. I left the financial documents on their table. "They know they have nothing. I just want to go home now." Before Kendrick could respond, the front door of the house banged loudly against the exterior siding. My mother came charging out onto the front porch, her face still twisted in absolute rage. She had followed me out desperately, needing to have the final word to reassert her dominance. She stomped down the brick steps and stopped abruptly when she noticed Kendrick standing protectively in front of me. Sylvia slowly looked him up and down, taking in his plain black t-shirt and unmarked sneakers. I could practically see the racist and classist gears turning in her head as she calculated his net worth to be absolutely zero. She let out a sharp, mocking bark of laughter that echoed down the quiet suburban street. "Well, this just makes perfect sense," Sylvia sneered, crossing her arms tightly over her chest. "I should have known you would end up with some broke, no-name guy off the street. He looks like he cannot even afford a decent suit, let alone take care of a woman. I suppose a street hustler is the perfect match for a glorified hired cook. You two truly deserve each other. You can both rot in your miserable little lower-ass lives while Brittany marries into real prestige." I felt my muscles tense, prepared to step forward and defend the man I loved. But Kendrick gently squeezed my hand to stop me. He did not get angry. He did not raise his voice or try to explain his massive wealth to a woman who was drowning in secret debt. He possessed the quiet, untouchable confidence of a man who actually owned the bank that held her mortgage. Instead, he gave my mother a devastatingly polite smile. "It is a pleasure to meet you, too, Mom." Kendrick said, his tone incredibly smooth and utterly unbothered. "Have a wonderful afternoon." He turned his back on her entirely, completely, dismissing her existence, which I knew would infuriate her more than any insult ever could. Kendrick opened the heavy passenger door of the SUV for me and shielded my head as I climbed inside the plush leather interior. As he leaned in to buckle my seatbelt, he pressed a soft, reassuring kiss to my uninjured cheek. "Are you ready, Mrs. Billionaire?" he whispered so quietly that only I could hear him. I smiled and nodded, my heart swelling with pure gratitude. Kendrick closed my door, walked around to the driver's side, and slid behind the wheel. We drove away, leaving my mother standing alone on the sidewalk, screaming something we could no longer hear through the soundproof glass. The moment we turned the corner out of their neighborhood, Kendrick reached up and pressed a button on the digital dashboard screen. The integrated Bluetooth system dialed a number immediately. A crisp, professional voice answered on the first ring. "Good afternoon, Mr. Kendrick," the voice said. "How can the legal team assist you today?" Kendrick kept his eyes locked on the road ahead, his jaw set in a hard, unforgiving line. "I need a full comprehensive background check run immediately," he instructed coldly. "Look into a man named Donovan, who is currently engaged to my fiancée, Sister Brittany. I want financial records, asset verification, and family history going back at least 10 years. I want to know absolutely everything about the people who think they are so much better than my future wife. Let us see who my future sister-in-law is really marrying." The very next morning, I woke up to my phone vibrating right off the edge of the mahogany nightstand. I reached out and grabbed it, expecting a text from my lead sous chef. Instead, my lock screen was completely overflowing with notifications. They were not from my parents or my sister. They were from extended family members I had not spoken to in over 5 years. My cousin Brendan, my Aunt Kathy, and my Uncle Greg had all sent me deeply aggressive messages. I unlocked my phone and opened the social media app that was generating all the chaos. Right at the top of my feed was a massive multi-paragraph post written by my mother, Sylvia. She had even tagged me in it to ensure maximum visibility. "It breaks a mother's heart to share this publicly," the post began. "But our family is going through an incredibly dark time. As many of you know, Brittany is getting married to a wonderful man next month. Unfortunately, her older sister Naomi has been suffering from a severe mental breakdown driven by deep-seated jealousy. Naomi has completely fabricated financial lies and is actively trying to sabotage her younger sister's big day. We have begged Naomi to seek psychiatric help, but she refuses and has instead chosen to aggressively attack us. Please keep our family in your prayers as we try to protect Brittany from this unprovoked abuse. It was a masterclass in manipulation. She painted herself as the long-suffering matriarch and Brittany as the innocent victim, while completely ignoring the thick folder of financial evidence I had dumped on her coffee table just yesterday. She knew perfectly well that our extended family thrived on drama, and she was weaponizing them against me. The comment section was an absolute war zone. Dozens of relatives were chiming in with their own toxic opinions. "How could you do this to your own family?" One aunt wrote, "You always were a bitter girl." Another cousin added, "You need to be institutionalized before you ruin the wedding." My direct messages were filled with venomous voice notes and text paragraphs demanding I apologize and pay for the damages I had allegedly caused. I did not reply to a single one of them. I got out of bed, took a shower, and headed straight to my culinary test kitchen in downtown Los Angeles. I had a massive tasting scheduled for a high-profile client, and I refused to let my mother's desperate social media circus ruin my focus. But she had whipped her flying monkeys into an absolute frenzy. Just before noon, the heavy glass doors of my studio swung open violently. My Aunt Kathy and my cousin Brendan marched right past my receptionist, demanding to see me. I stepped out of the kitchen, wiping my hands on a towel to find them standing in the middle of my pristine lobby, looking around with absolute disdain. "You have real nerves showing your face at work acting like nothing is wrong." Aunt Kathy yelled, her voice echoing off the high ceilings. "Your mother is at home crying her eyes out because of your psychotic behavior." Brendan stepped forward aggressively, crossing his arms. "You are going to cut a check for Brittany today, Naomi," he demanded. "Or we are going to make sure every single person in this city knows exactly what kind of toxic, jealous person you really are." I looked at both of them standing in my multi-million-dollar facility, wearing cheap clothes and threatening me on behalf of a woman who owed me hundreds of thousands of dollars. I did not raise my voice. I simply turned to my front desk manager, who was already holding the phone. "Call building security," I instructed calmly. "Have these two individuals escorted off the premises and permanently banned from the building. If they refuse to leave, call the police and press charges for trespassing and harassment." Aunt Kathy gasped, clutching her pearls in exaggerated shock. "You would call the police on your own flesh and blood," she shrieked. "You are truly sick, Naomi." They backed away toward the doors, cursing me loudly as the massive security guards approached the lobby. I walked back into my private office and sat down at my desk. I pulled out my phone and opened my mother's post again. I did not delete the comments. I did not block anyone. Instead, I meticulously took high-resolution screenshots of every single nasty comment, every direct message, and every vicious threat. I created a dedicated digital folder compiling a comprehensive list of every relative who had blindly chosen to attack me. They were permanently writing themselves out of my life, and I wanted to keep the receipts. Meanwhile, on the other side of town, the mail carrier was walking up the driveway of my parents' suburban home. He dropped a stack of past due bills into their rusty metal mailbox. But on top of the pile, he placed something incredibly unique. It was a thick, beautifully embossed black and gold envelope made of heavy artisan cardstock. There was no return address. Sylvia stepped out onto the front porch to collect the morning mail. When she saw the luxurious gold foil catching the sunlight, she immediately grabbed it, her heart racing. She had absolutely no idea what she was about to open. Sylvia slid her manicured thumbnail under the gold wax seal of the heavy black envelope. She stood right there on the porch, completely ignoring the stack of final notice utility bills in her other hand. As she pulled out the thick cardstock, her eyes went wide. The invitation was a masterpiece of luxury stationery in deeply embossed gold foil. The text invited her, and a +1 to an exclusive private gala in the Hollywood Hills. The date was set for the Friday evening, exactly one day before Brittany was scheduled to get married. There was absolutely no host name listed anywhere on the card. At the bottom in elegant cursive were 3 simple words: dress code haute couture. Sylvia practically kicked the front door open and sprinted into the living room where Brittany was sulking on the sofa. Brittany had been miserable for days ever since her wedding venue was officially downgraded to a poorly ventilated community center on the outskirts of town. "Look at this," Sylvia gasped, tossing the black and gold card onto her daughter's lap. Brittany picked it up, her eyes scanning the luxurious details. Her sad demeanor instantly vanished, replaced by a frantic, greedy energy. "Who sent this?" Brittany asked, her voice trembling with excitement. "A private gala in the hills on a Friday night." "Mom, this has to be from Donovan's family. His parents are deeply connected in the Los Angeles real estate scene. They probably realized our wedding venue situation was a minor setback and want to introduce us to their high society friends before the actual ceremony." It was truly fascinating how their minds worked. Instead of questioning why an anonymous invitation arrived at a home facing foreclosure, they immediately twisted reality to fit their delusions of grandeur. They desperately needed to believe that Donovan's family was their golden ticket into the upper echelon of society. They spent the next 2 hours obsessing over the invitation, analyzing the weight of the paper, and researching the address, which belonged to a $50 million private estate. There was only one massive problem. The date and time of the mysterious gala conflicted entirely with Brittany's own rehearsal dinner. Due to their severe lack of funds, Richard had booked a cheap local diner to host Donovan's family the night before the wedding. It was embarrassing, but it was all they could afford without my financial backing. "Can't cancel the diner," Sylvia ordered, pacing the living room floor. "We cannot pass up an opportunity to network with the elite. Donovan's family will understand. In fact, they will probably be at this gala themselves. We will just tell everyone that the rehearsal dinner is canceled due to unforeseen scheduling conflicts." Brittany nodded vigorously, completely agreeing to sabotage her own wedding weekend just for a taste of billionaire status. "We need to go shopping," Brittany declared. "The dress code says haute couture. I am going to return that cheap rehearsal dress I bought and max out Dad's last remaining credit card. We are going to look like we belong there." They spent the entire week preparing for an event they knew absolutely nothing about. They endured the humiliation of canceling their own dinner arrangements, lying to their future in-laws, and spending money they absolutely did not have just to rent designer gowns and hire a freelance makeup artist. They were blindingly obsessed with the idea of rubbing their newly acquired elite status in the faces of everyone they knew, especially mine. They fully intended to take dozens of photos at the gala and post them all over social media to prove they were thriving without me. I knew exactly what they were doing because I knew exactly how their shallow minds operated. I was sitting in my glass-walled office overlooking the Los Angeles skyline when my security team confirmed that the tracking barcode on the black envelope had been scanned at the gates of the estate. They had taken the bait hook, line, and sinker. My mother and sister were currently squeezing themselves into rented designer dresses and squeezing their delusion into a rented black car headed toward the Hollywood Hills. They genuinely thought they were walking into a room full of real estate tycoons ready to welcome them into the fold. They had absolutely no idea that the mysterious host who had sent them the invitation was not a real estate billionaire from Donovan's family. The ultra-exclusive gala they were risking everything to attend was actually the official rehearsal dinner for my wedding. And my husband-to-be Kendrick had designed the guest list specifically to watch them walk right into our trap. Saturday afternoon arrived bringing with it a sweltering heat wave that completely overwhelmed the ancient air conditioning unit at the Oak Creek Community Center. This was the grim reality of Brittany and Donovan getting married since I had permanently withdrawn my massive financial backing. My father was forced to secure the only venue he could afford on a 2-week notice. The stark contrast between the Plaza Hotel ballroom she had bragged about and this humid, heavily scuffed gymnasium was absolutely humiliating for them. My parents had desperately tried to disguise the basketball court lines on the floor by dragging in cheap folding tables and covering them with thin polyester tablecloths, but there was no hiding the smell of old floor wax and stale sweat that clung to the air. Brittany was completely inconsolable because I refused to hand over my credit card at the luxury boutique. She had been forced to settle for a discount rack gown that fit poorly and itched terribly. Her makeup was already melting off her face from the suffocating humidity inside the hall. Instead of enjoying her wedding day, she spent the entire afternoon throwing massive temper tantrums in the makeshift bridal suite, which was literally just the referee's locker room. She screamed at my mother. She yelled at the amateur photographer they had hired off the internet. She completely lost her mind when she saw the floral centerpieces, which were already wilting under the harsh fluorescent lights of the community center. Everything she had meticulously planned to show off her fake wealth was crumbling right in front of her eyes. The situation only grew worse when Donovan and his parents arrived. Donovan's mother and father had spent the entire engagement bragging about their supposed high society connections. Now they were standing in a dingy gymnasium wearing heavy formal wear and looking around with expressions of pure unfiltered disgust. They refused to sit on the cheap metal folding chairs. They huddled tightly together in the corner, whispering aggressively to Donovan. I could easily imagine the terrible things they were saying. They were finally realizing that the wealthy, sophisticated family they thought their son was marrying into was actually entirely broke. The final nail in the coffin was the reception dinner. My family could not afford a professional hospitality team, so they hired a budget catering service that usually handled local neighborhood barbecues. The servers walked out carrying massive aluminum trays of food that looked absolutely pathetic. Instead of the 5-star gourmet menu I had originally designed for, her guests were handed lukewarm plates of rubbery, overcooked chicken and soggy vegetables. Donovan's mother took one look at the slimy chicken on her plate and aggressively pushed it away, muttering something highly offensive to my mother, Sylvia. My father, Richard, sat at the head table, sweating through his rented tuxedo, trying desperately to pretend everything was fine. He kept offering the unhappy guests cheap wine poured directly from large cardboard boxes, but the humiliation was thick enough to choke on. The grand illusion of their superior social status was officially dead. Brittany could not handle the crushing embarrassment. She sat at the center of the head watching her new in-laws judge her family while her friends picked awkwardly at their terrible food. To cope with the disaster, she started drinking heavily. She bypassed the boxed wine and demanded the single bottle of expensive vodka my father had hidden under the table. She poured drink after drink, her face growing flushed and her behavior becoming increasingly erratic. By the time the DJ announced the traditional wedding toasts, Brittany was entirely intoxicated. She was practically vibrating with a toxic mix of deep humiliation and furious anger. She needed a scapegoat. She desperately needed someone to blame for the fact that her perfect day was a complete and utter nightmare. And in her deeply delusional mind, there was only one person responsible for her suffering. Donovan tried to gently place his hand on her arm to calm her down, but she violently shoved him away. The heavy metal chair screeched loudly against the gymnasium floor as Brittany suddenly stood up. She stumbled slightly, her cheap heels catching on the hem of her discount dress. She marched straight past the best man and marched directly over to the DJ booth. Her eyes were wild and furious. She aggressively snatched the microphone right out of the startled musician's hand. A loud, sharp screech of static echoed through the humid room, forcing all the disgusted guests to cover their ears and stare directly at her. I was not at the Oak Creek Community Center to witness this spectacular meltdown in person. But because nearly every guest in that room had their smartphones out recording the disaster, I would eventually see the entire scene unfold from multiple different angles. The loud feedback from the microphone finally died down, leaving a heavy, suffocating silence in the humid gymnasium. Every single guest turned to stare at my sister. Brittany swayed slightly on her feet, gripping the microphone so tightly her knuckles turned white. Instead of thanking everyone for coming or raising a glass to her new husband, she pointed a shaking finger toward the back of the room as if I were somehow standing there hiding in the shadows. "I want to make a toast," she slurred, her words bleeding together in a messy, drunken draw. "I want to make a toast to the person who completely destroyed my perfect day." My parents sat frozen at the head table, completely unsure of how to stop the incoming train wreck. Donovan stared at his new bride in absolute horror. "I know you are all wondering why we are sitting in this disgusting, sweaty room eating garbage food," Brittany yelled, her voice echoing terribly off the cinder block walls. "It is because of my psychopathic, broke sister Naomi. She promised to pay for my real venue, and then she maliciously pulled the funding at the last minute just to humiliate me. She is so insanely jealous of me getting married that she intentionally sabotaged my entire wedding. She is a bitter, pathetic loser who flips burgers for a living, and she wanted me to be as miserable as she is." The guests shifted uncomfortably in their metal folding chairs. Donovan's parents exchanged a look of pure disgust, openly whispering to each other about the absolute trash they had somehow married their son into. Brittany was completely oblivious to the second-hand embarrassment radiating through the room. She kept rambling, listing every single imaginary grievance she had against me, crying about how unfair it was that she had to wear a cheap dress while I sat at home doing nothing with my pathetic life. She even blamed me for the humidity and the wilting flowers, claiming my toxic energy had somehow cursed the building. Donovan could not take the humiliation for another second. He stood up from his chair, his face burning bright red, and quickly walked over to the DJ booth. "Brittany, please stop," he hissed, trying to keep his voice low. "You are drunk and you are embarrassing both of us. Give me the microphone right now." He reached out to grab the metal handle, but Brittany violently yanked it away from him. "Do not tell me what to do," she screamed into the mic, amplifying her rage for everyone to hear. "This is my wedding and I'm going to tell the truth about my psychotic sister." Donovan stepped closer, his embarrassment rapidly morphing into genuine anger. He reached for the microphone again, grabbing her wrist this time. "Give it to me," Donovan demanded, his voice hard and uncompromising. A literal physical tugafor erupted right in the middle of the makeshift dance floor. Brittany planted her feet and pulled back with all her drunken strength, screaming at him to let her go. My father finally stood up from the head table to intervene, but he was far too late. The heel of Brittany's discount wedding shoe suddenly snapped under the aggressive pressure. She lost her balance completely and violently tumbled backward, dragging Donovan down to the floor with her. They crashed onto the hard wooden planks in a tangled, messy heap of cheap white fabric and rented tuxedo material. The microphone slammed against the ground, letting out a deafening boom, followed by a high-pitched, piercing screech that made the guests flinch. Donovan scrambled to his feet, his face twisted in absolute fury. He looked down at his crying, thrashing bride and then looked directly at his horrified parents. The grand illusion of their high society romance was completely dead, destroyed by a drunken temper tantrum and a physical brawl over a microphone. Brittany sat on the floor sobbing loudly, her makeup smudged halfway down her cheek, still screaming my name like a curse word. My mother rushed forward, desperately trying to pull Brittany off the floor and salvage whatever tiny shred of dignity remained. The guests were dead silent, absolutely paralyzed by the sheer magnitude of the disaster they had just witnessed. Nobody moved, nobody spoke. But right in the middle of Brittany's hysterical crying, a sharp, synchronized sound suddenly pierced the heavy silence of the gymnasium. It was a digital chime, then another and another. Within 5 seconds, every single cell phone in the room, from the cheap flip phones of distant relatives to the expensive smartphones of Donovan's parents, lit up and chimed simultaneously with an urgent breaking news alert. The chorus of digital alerts echoed off the cinder block walls of the community center like a bizarre symphony. It was not just one or two phones ringing. It was a massive synchronized wave of breaking news notifications hitting every single device in the room at the exact same moment. In the suffocating silence that followed Brittany and Donovan crashing to the floor, the sound was deafening. Cousin Brendan, who had marched into my lobby just days earlier to threaten me, slowly pulled his smartphone from his pocket. He stared at the glowing screen. His eyes widened in absolute shock and his jaw dropped open. He looked up from his phone, staring directly at my parents, who were still frozen at the head table. Then, in a voice that trembled with disbelief, Brendan read the headline out loud for the entire gymnasium to hear. Vogue exclusive tech mogul and music producer Kendrick marries celebrity chef Naomi in $15 million California estate wedding. The words hung heavily in the humid, stale air. For a split second, nobody moved. Then, as if a spell had been broken, every single guest scrambled to dig their own phones out of their pockets and purses. The glow of dozens of screens illuminated the dim room. The article was not just a small mention. It was a massive multi-page digital spread featuring breathtaking high-resolution photographs captured by a world-renowned fashion photographer. The contrast between the images on their screens and the depressing reality of the community center was staggering. Guests scrolled past pictures of our private Malibu fortress covered in thousands of imported white orchids. They saw Kendrick looking like absolute royalty in a custom-tailored tuxedo standing proudly at the altar. The article went into extensive detail about his true identity. It outlined his staggering net worth, his massive tech acquisitions, and his Grammy-winning record label. He was a self-made billionaire. The guest read in absolute awe about the man my mother had confidently insulted on her front lawn just weeks ago. She had called him a street hustler and a broke no-name guy who could not afford a decent suit. Now the entire world knew he possessed more wealth and power than anyone in our family could ever comprehend. But the article did not stop at Kendrick. It dedicated a massive section entirely to my empire. Vogue described me as a culinary visionary and the brilliant mind behind the most exclusive hospitality group in the country. It listed my celebrity clientele, my international restaurant locations, and estimated my corporate valuation in the hundreds of millions of dollars. I was not a greasy cook flipping burgers. I was the powerhouse CEO who had been quietly funding my family's entire fake upper-class lifestyle for the past 8 years. The whispers began to spread rapidly through the humid room. Donovan's parents stared at their phone screens and then looked up at my father, Richard, with expressions of pure, unadulterated rage. They suddenly realized they had aligned themselves with the completely wrong sister. Brittany was sitting on the dirty floor, her cheap discount dress torn at the seams, looking like an absolute fool. Meanwhile, the sister she had just spent 10 minutes aggressively trashing on a microphone was currently trending globally as the stunning bride of the decade. Sylvia could not comprehend what was happening around her. She practically lunged across the table and snatched Brendan's phone right out of his hand. Her perfectly manicured fingers shook violently as she furiously scrolled through the stunning digital spread. She saw the towering floral arrangements that cost more than her entire heavily mortgaged house. She saw the list celebrities sitting in the front row of our ceremony, and then she swiped to the final breathtaking image. It was a stunning close-up portrait of Kendrick and me holding hands. Resting perfectly on my left ring finger was a flawless 5-carat emerald cut diamond. It was a custom piece that cost more than everything my parents had ever owned combined. Staring at that massive diamond, the brutal reality of her catastrophic mistake finally crashed down on her shoulders. She had actively driven away a billionaire son-in-law and aggressively disowned her incredibly wealthy daughter, all to protect a broke, deeply indebted golden child who was currently sobbing on a gymnasium floor. Sylvia let out a strange, high-pitched gasp that sounded like she was suffocating. Her face instantly drained of all its color, turning a sickly ashen gray. She dropped the phone onto the floor, clutching both of her hands tightly against her chest. Richard yelled her name in a panic, but she was already swaying heavily on her feet. Her eyes rolled back into her head, and her knees completely buckled beneath her. She plummeted forward, entirely unconscious, crashing face first right into the middle of Brittany's cheap melting buttercream sheet cake. The chaotic wailing of the ambulance siren eventually faded into the rhythmic beeping of a hospital heart monitor. Sylvia fluttered her eyes open, blinking against the harsh fluorescent lights of the emergency room. Her face had been hastily wiped clean of the cheap buttercream frosting by the paramedics, but her hair was still a sticky, matted disaster. A young nurse was standing next to the bed, adjusting an intravenous drip attached to her arm, gently explaining that her sudden dramatic collapse was likely due to an acute mixture of severe stress and dehydration. Sylvia completely ignored the medical professional. She aggressively swatted the nurse's hand away and demanded her purse. Richard, who had been sitting rigidly in the uncomfortable plastic visitor chair, quickly retrieved her cell phone from the leather bag. Sylvia did not ask about her blood pressure. She did not ask if the guests had enjoyed the rest of the reception. She did not even ask where her newlywed daughter was. She instantly unlocked her screen and brought the digital magazine spread right back up. "Look at this, Richard," she whispered, her voice trembling with a frantic, highly caffeinated energy. Just look at the sheer scale of this private estate. The article says Kendrick purchased it in cash last year. And Naomi, she is not just a chef. She is listed as the sole owner of a hospitality empire currently valued in the hundreds of millions. She has been sitting on a massive fortune this entire time, while we were scraping by to pay for a disgusting, humid community center. Richard stood up and leaned heavily over the hospital bed, his eyes scanning the high-resolution photographs. He stared hungrily at the custom 5-carat diamond ring and the designer tuxedo. A dark, greedy realization completely washed over his face, instantly replacing any lingering concern he had for the humiliating disaster they had just left behind. "We are her parents, Sylvia," he said, his tone dropping into a low conspiratorial whisper. "We gave her the exact foundation she needed to build all of this. She owes her incredible work ethic entirely to us. If it were not for our strict parenting and high expectations, she never would have been pushed to achieve such massive success in the culinary world." It was truly sickening how quickly and effortlessly they could completely rewrite history to fit their twisted narrative. Less than 3 hours ago, they were sitting at a cheap folding table, proudly agreeing with Brittany as she publicly trashed me on a microphone. They had spent decades actively destroying my self-esteem and draining my bank accounts. Now sitting in a sterile hospital room, surrounded by the absolute wreckage of their own massive financial failures, they were desperately trying to rebrand their relentless abuse as supportive tough love. They immediately started plotting how to tap into my newly discovered wealth. They decided they would contact Kendrick's public relations team first thing in the morning. They would play the role of the proud, loving parents who had intentionally kept their distance to let their eldest daughter shine independently. They genuinely believed that because we shared the same blood, I would simply forget a lifetime of cruelty. They actually thought they could just smile, apologize for the misunderstanding at the bridal boutique, and be instantly welcomed into a billionaire lifestyle with open arms. "We need to draft a public statement immediately," Richard muttered, pacing the small confines of the hospital room. "We need to make it incredibly clear to the media that we are deeply involved in her life before any reporters start asking questions about why we were not sitting in the front row of that gorgeous wedding. We can say we were attending a private family matter." Sylvia nodded vigorously, her eyes gleaming with dollar signs. "Yes, and we need to invite them to dinner. Kendrick needs to see that we are a respectable family. We can finally pay off the mortgage with just a fraction of what they spent on those floral arrangements." Before Richard could even agree with her delusional plan, the heavy wooden door to the hospital room violently slammed open. The loud crash made both of my parents jump in shock. Standing in the doorway was Brittany. She looked absolutely unhinged. She was still wearing her cheap discount wedding dress, but it was completely destroyed. The delicate lace was torn in multiple places. The hem was filthy, and the entire front bodice was heavily stained with sweat and dirt from her physical brawl on the gymnasium floor. Her elaborate bridal updo had completely fallen apart, and her mascara was running down her face in thick black rivers. She was hyperventilating, clutching her cell phone so tightly her knuckles were stark white. "He left me," Brittany screamed, her voice cracking with pure hysterical panic. "Donovan just packed all his bags and walked right out of the hotel room. He left me on my wedding night." The sterile walls of the emergency room seemed to close in as Brittany collapsed into the uncomfortable plastic visitor chair, burying her face in her hands. Between her hysterical sobs, she finally managed to explain exactly what had happened over the last hour. The reality of her ruined wedding night was far more humiliating than a physical brawl over a microphone. It was a complete structural collapse of the massive lie she had built her entire life around. Exactly 1 hour before she stormed into the hospital room, Brittany and Donovan had arrived at their discounted honeymoon suite at a budget hotel near the airport. The atmosphere between them was already toxic after the disastrous reception. Donovan was furiously untying his rented bow tie when his cell phone buzzed with a priority email notification. The sender address was completely anonymous and heavily encrypted. The subject line simply read, "Financial disclosure required." Donovan opened the email. Inside was a comprehensive, highly detailed background check compiled by Kendrick's ruthless legal team. It laid out every single financial secret Brittany had been desperately hiding. Donovan scrolled through pages of maxed-out credit cards, retail store accounts in deep default, and high-interest personal loans taken out just to buy designer handbags and luxury shoes. The grand total of her hidden debt was a staggering $80,000. She did not have a dime to her name. She had been secretly planning to dump her massive financial burden onto him the moment they were legally married. Donovan turned completely pale. He spun around and shoved his glowing phone screen directly into Brittany's face. He started screaming at her, calling her a fraud and a gold digger. He demanded to know how she could possibly trap him in a marriage when she was drowning in toxic debt. He paced the cheap hotel room, pulling at his hair, yelling that he was completely ruined because of her lies. Brittany backed against the cheap hotel dresser, her heart pounding with panic. But instead of apologizing, she immediately went on the offensive. She screamed right back at him. She told him to stop acting so dramatic and just pay it off. She yelled that $80,000 was absolutely nothing to his wealthy real estate family. She demanded he call his parents, ask for an advance on his trust fund, and wipe her slate clean so they could start their high society life together. That was the exact moment Donovan stopped pacing. He looked at her with an expression of pure unfiltered disgust and let out a harsh, bitter laugh. He slowly shook his head and swiped to the next page of the anonymous dossier. The encrypted email did not just contain a background check on Brittany. It also contained a full financial investigation into Donovan's family. He threw the phone onto the bed so she could read it for herself. Donovan's parents did not own commercial real estate. They did not have millions sitting in offshore accounts. They were low-level property managers who rented the house they lived in. They leased their luxury cars to keep up appearances, and they were drowning in their own massive mountain of debt. Donovan did not have a trust fund. He did not even have a savings account. His parents had aggressively pushed him to marry Brittany because they genuinely believed my family was wealthy enough to support all of them. They stood there in the harsh, fluorescent lighting of the cheap hotel room, staring at each other in absolute horror. They were two broke, desperate people who had spent an entire year aggressively trying to gold dig each other. They had completely scammed one another. The grand illusion was shattered into a million irreparable pieces. Donovan did not say another word. He simply grabbed the suitcase he had unpacked just 10 minutes earlier and walked straight out the door. He told her over his shoulder that he would be contacting his lawyer first thing Monday morning to file for an immediate annulment based on financial fraud. Now sitting in the emergency room, Brittany finished recounting the agonizing story. She grabbed our father's arm, her fingernails digging into his jacket. "You have to fix this," she cried frantically, looking back and forth between Richard and Sylvia. "You have to give me the money to pay off the credit cards. If I can just show Donovan that we have cash, he will come back. Please, you have to fix my life." Richard looked completely helpless, knowing full well his bank accounts were entirely empty. But Sylvia did not look helpless at all. Her eyes were no longer focused on her sobbing golden child. She looked down at her cell phone, where the Vogue article highlighting my billion-dollar wedding was still brightly illuminated on the screen. Sylvia sat up straighter in the hospital bed, her face hardening into a cold, calculating mask. "Stop crying, Brittany," she commanded, her voice completely devoid of any maternal warmth. "Your father and I cannot pay your debts, but Naomi can. Naomi has more than enough money to fix all of this, and it is about time she remembers where she came from." The sun rose over the Pacific Ocean, casting a warm golden light through the floor-toseling windows of my penthouse. It was a beautiful, peaceful morning. I poured myself a cup of black coffee and sat at the kitchen island, finally turning my phone off silent mode. Instantly, the device began vibrating aggressively against the marble countertop. I expected it to be a continuation of the vicious hate mail from our extended family following my mother's toxic social media post. But when I unlocked the screen, the tone of the messages had undergone a massive whiplash-inducing transformation. There were over 50 missed texts and 5 new voicemails. Every single one of them was from my parents or my sister. The sheer audacity of their sudden change in behavior was honestly breathtaking. The first message was from my father, Richard. It read, "Good morning, sweetheart. I saw the wonderful news online today. Your mother and I are just so incredibly proud of the woman you have become. Let us get lunch this week." It was as if he had entirely forgotten that just days ago, he had ordered me to take out a second mortgage on my home to fund a party I was banned from attending. He was completely pretending that our massive blowout in his living room had never happened. Next was a string of long, rambling paragraphs from Brittany. "Naomi, I am so incredibly sorry for everything she wrote. Wedding planning just made me completely lose my mind with stress. You are my big sister, and I need you so much right now. I miss you. Let us put all this silly drama behind us and go to the spa, just the two of us. She conveniently left out the part where her new husband had literally packed his bags and abandoned her at a cheap hotel because she was drowning in secret credit card debt. She just wanted my black card back. But the absolute worst of all was the voicemail from my mother. I tapped play and lifted the phone to my ear. Sylvia was sobbing, but it was a completely forced theatrical cry. "Oh, my sweet, beautiful Naomi," she wailed into the receiver. "I have hardly slept a wink since our little misunderstanding at the bridal boutique. You know how protective I get over my girls, but I never meant to hurt you. You are my favorite daughter, and my heart is just entirely broken without you. Please call your mother back. Family is everything, and we need to stick together." I pulled the phone away from my ear and stared at the screen in pure disgust. A little misunderstanding. That was what she called publicly humiliating me, demanding my money, and then physically slapping me across the face when I exposed their financial ruin. They were not apologizing because they felt guilty. They were apologizing because they had finally seen the 5-carat diamond on my finger and read the Vogue article confirming my massive net worth. They realized I was their only remaining lifeboat, and they were desperately trying to climb aboard. I did not type a single letter in response. I simply deleted the voicemail, swiped their text threads into the archive folder, and went straight to work. I had an incredibly busy day ahead of me at my flagship Michelin star restaurant in Beverly Hills. We were fully booked for the lunch service with several high-profile talent agents and studio executives dining in the main room. I tied on my pristine white chef's apron and stepped into the bustling open concept kitchen, entirely focused on executing a flawless service. For the first 2 hours, everything ran like a perfectly oiled machine. The dining room hummed with the quiet, sophisticated chatter of Lowe's Angels Elite. The clinking of crystal wine glasses and the soft jazz music created an atmosphere of pure luxury. I was at the plating station meticulously adding a delicate garnish to a seared scallop dish when I heard a sharp, disruptive sound coming from the front entrance. It was a loud, shrill voice echoing over the quiet ambience of the dining room. "Do you have any idea who we are?" the voice demanded. I stopped what I was doing and looked up through the glass partition. Standing right at the mahogany host stand, blocking the entrance for other guests, were Sylvia, Richard, and Brittany. They had actually tracked down my most exclusive property. Brittany was wearing a pair of oversized designer sunglasses indoors, trying to look wealthy, while Sylvia aggressively pointed a finger at my very confused lead hostess. "We do not need a reservation," my mother snapped loudly enough for half the restaurant to hear. "We are the owner's family. Tell Naomi her parents are here and clear your best table for us immediately." They had brought their toxic circus directly to my doorstep. I wiped my hands on a clean towel, left the kitchen, and walked out into the main dining room. The atmosphere in my flagship restaurant was carefully curated to be a sanctuary of refined elegance. Soft ambient lighting illuminated the faces of studio executives and prominent talent agents enjoying their expensive meals. But standing right at the front entrance, my family was completely shattering that carefully crafted piece. My mother Sylvia was practically leaning over the mahogany host stand, aggressively pointing her finger in the face of my highly trained lead hostess. "Tell your little chef that her mother is here," Sylvia demanded, her voice shrill and entirely unsuited for the sophisticated environment. "We want the best table in the house right now, and bring us 3 glasses of your most expensive champagne while we wait. We are not paying for it, obviously." Brittany stood right behind her, wearing massive designer sunglasses indoors, shifting her weight impatiently. She looked around at the wealthy patrons with an absurd sense of superiority, completely oblivious to the fact that they were staring at her with profound second-hand embarrassment. My father, Richard, stood puffing his chest out, trying to look intimidating. I walked calmly across the dining room floor, the soft click of my shoes barely registering over the quiet jazz music. I did not storm over there. I did not look angry or embarrassed. I approached the host's stand with the exact same professional, detached demeanor I would use for any unruly customer who wandered in off the street. "Is there a problem here?" I asked, keeping my voice perfectly level. Sylvia spun around, a massive fake smile stretching across her face the moment she saw me. "Naomi, sweetheart," she practically sang, holding her arms out as if she was going to hug me. "Thank goodness you are here. Your little employee at the front desk was refusing to seat us." Tell her to take us to the private dining room immediately. We have so much to catch up on, and we brought an enormous appetite. I completely ignored her outstretched arms. I did not acknowledge her fake affection. I turned my attention directly to my lead hostess. Do these individuals have a reservation? I asked formally. No, chef, the hostess replied, looking incredibly relieved that I had intervened. They do not have a reservation, and we are completely fully booked for the entire afternoon service. I turned back to my mother, looking her directly in the eyes. Then I am afraid we cannot accommodate you today, I said, my tone ice cold and strictly business. This is a private establishment. If you do not have a reservation, I must ask you to leave immediately so my actual guests can enjoy their meals in peace. The fake smile instantly slid off my mother's face, replaced by a look of pure shock. Excuse me, she gasped, her voice rising another octave. I am your mother. This is your father and your sister. You own this entire building. You are going to seat us right now, and you are going to treat us with the respect we deserve. Do not play these little power games with me, Naomi. Several patrons at the nearby tables actually stopped eating to watch the bizarre spectacle. Brittany pulled her sunglasses down the bridge of her nose, glaring at me. Stop acting like you are better than us just because you got lucky and married a rich guy, Brittany hissed. We are your family. Give us a table. They truly believed that causing a public scene would force me into submission. They thought my desire to protect my professional reputation would make me cave to their demands just to quiet them down. They were completely wrong. I did not argue with them. I did not lower myself to their level by engaging in a screaming match in the middle of my life's work. I simply raised my hand and made a sharp, brief gesture toward the massive double doors leading to the lobby. Instantly, my head of private security stepped out from the shadows. He was a towering former military contractor wearing a tailored black suit and a completely unreadable expression. Yes, Mom, the security chief said, stepping up right beside me. Remove these trespassers from the property, I ordered, my voice echoing clearly across the silent reception area. They are permanently banned from this establishment. If they refuse to leave or if they attempt to cause any further disruption, you are authorized to call the LAPT and have them arrested for trespassing and disturbing the peace. My father's face turned completely purple with rage. You would not dare, Richard growled, taking an aggressive step toward me. Try me, I whispered, staring him down with absolute zero hesitation. The security chief immediately stepped between us, placing a heavy, solid hand right on my father's chest. It is time to go, the guard said, his voice deep and uncompromising. He physically corralled all three of them toward the heavy glass exit doors. Sylvia started screaming about how I was an ungrateful monster, but the thick soundproof doors swung shut behind them entirely, cutting off her toxic tantrum. I turned around, offered a polite, apologetic smile to my dining room guests, and walked right back into the kitchen as if absolutely nothing had happened. Humiliated and physically escorted out onto the sun-baked sidewalk of Beverly Hills, my family was absolutely seething. The embarrassment of being thrown out of a luxury restaurant in front of Lowe's Angels Elite burned through them like acid. Richard paced back and forth on the concrete, his fists clenched tight. He was entirely broke, facing foreclosure, and now utterly stripped of his pride. Desperation and sheer malice completely took over his rational thinking. He pulled his cell phone out of his pocket, his fingers trembling with rage, and decided to make the biggest mistake of his entire life. He opened his text thread with me and began typing a vicious threat. He hit send without a single second of hesitation. 4 hours later, the lunch service had wrapped up perfectly. I left the restaurant and took the private elevator straight up to the penthouse apartment, and I shared with Kendrick. The space was a massive ultra-modern sanctuary with sweeping panoramic views of the entire city. Kendrick was sitting on a plush leather sofa in the living room, dressed casually in sweatpants and a t-shirt, reviewing some digital contracts on his laptop. I walked over, dropped my keys onto the glass coffee table, and let out a long sigh. I sat down next to him and handed him my unlocked cell phone. You need to read this, I said quietly. Kendrick took the phone and read the text message my father had sent hours earlier. The message was incredibly long and explicitly clear in its criminal intent. It read, "You think you can humiliate us and just walk away, Naomi? Think again. You are going to wire $500,000 into my bank account by the end of the day tomorrow. If you do not, I am going straight to TMZ and every major gossip blog on the internet. I will tell them that your new billionaire husband is physically and emotionally abusing you. I will tell them he has completely isolated you from your loving family and that you are a prisoner in your own home. Pay us the money, or we will completely destroy his reputation and his company's." I watched Kendrick's face carefully. A normal person would have panicked. A normal person would have been furious at the blatant extortion and the disgusting lies my father was threatening to spread. But Kendrick was not a normal person. He was a man who navigated shark-infested corporate waters on a daily basis. Kendrick did not yell. He did not look worried. A slow, dark, incredibly dangerous smile spread across his face. He gently set my phone down on the coffee table and pulled his laptop onto his knees. "They really think they can extort a billionaire?" Kendrick murmured, his fingers flying across the keyboard with lightning speed. "That is genuinely fascinating." He took a high-resolution screenshot of the text message, attached it to an encrypted email, and forwarded it directly to his ruthless legal team. He typed a single sentence of instruction to his lead attorney: destroy them legally and permanently. He closed the laptop, set it aside, and pulled me into his arms, kissing the top of my head. "Do not give it another thought, beautiful," he whispered. "It is already handled." Exactly 20 minutes later, my parents were sitting in their cramped, dimly lit living room, arguing about how they were going to spend the $500,000 they genuinely believed I would be terrified into sending. A loud, sharp knock echoed from their front door. Richard smirked proudly, assuming I had sent a messenger with a certified check begging for their silence. He swaggered over to the front door and pulled it open. Standing on the porch was not a wealthy messenger. It was a completely stoic process server holding a thick, heavy manila envelope. "Richard Sylvia?" the man asked, confirming his identity. "Yes, that is me," Richard said, puffing his chest out. "You have been officially served," the man stated flatly, shoving the thick envelope directly into Richard's chest before turning around and walking quickly back to his unmarked car. Richard frowned, confused. He tore open the heavy envelope and pulled out a massive stack of legal documents stamped with the seal of the most terrifying corporate law firm in California. Sylvia and Brittany rushed over to the door, peering over his shoulder as he read the first page. It was an immediate and aggressive cease and desist order. The legal language was absolute brutality on paper. It explicitly outlined that their text message constituted felony extortion and criminal blackmail under federal law. But that was not the worst part. The final paragraph delivered the ultimate lethal blow. It stated that if they ever contacted me again, if they ever spoke my name to the press, or if they ever came within 500 FT of any property owned by me or Kendrick, they would instantly be hit with a $10 million defamation and harassment lawsuit that would legally seize every single remaining asset they possessed, including the clothes on their backs. The heavy manila envelope slipped from Richard's trembling hands and hit the cramped apartment floor with a dull thud. For a long moment, the dimly lit living room was completely silent. Brittany stared at the scattered legal documents with wide, terrified eyes. Richard slumped onto the worn fabric sofa, rubbing his temples as the reality of a $10 million defamation lawsuit sank in. They had completely overplayed their hand, and now they were facing total financial annihilation. Any rational human being would have taken this terrifying legal threat as the ultimate sign to back off forever and leave me alone. But Sylvia was not a rational human being. Her deep-seated narcissism simply could not process the concept of defeat. Instead of panicking, Sylvia let out a loud, dismissive scoff. She bent down, picked up the thick stack of papers, and tossed them onto the coffee table like they were nothing more than junk mail. "Do you honestly believe Naomi wrote this?" she asked, crossing her arms and looking down at her terrified husband. "Look at this aggressive corporate language, Richard. This has Kendrick written all over it. That controlling billionaire is actively trying to isolate our daughter from her loving family. He had his lawyers draft this nonsense to scare us away because he knows the incredible influence we have over her." Richard looked up, his face pale and sweating. "Sylvia, it is a $10 million lawsuit," he stammered, his voice shaking. "If we even speak her name to the press, we will lose the leased cars. We will lose this cheap apartment. We will lose absolutely everything. We are already losing everything." Sylvia snapped, her voice sharp and uncompromising. "Brittany is drowning in debt and Donovan is filing for an annulment. We have absolutely no money left. Naomi is our only way out of this nightmare. She's just playing hard to get Richard. She is putting up walls because she wants to see if we care enough to fight for her. She is testing our loyalty, and I refuse to fail my daughter." It was a stunning display of psychological gymnastics. Sylvia completely rewrote the narrative, transforming a severe legal warning into a twisted, romanticized test of family devotion. She marched over to the small kitchen counter and grabbed her digital tablet. If Naomi was not going to answer her text messages, Sylvia decided she would just have to deliver her fake apologies in person. She spent the next 48 hours obsessively scouring the internet. She dug through celebrity gossip blogs, anonymous comment sections, and obscure social media threads. Finally, her obsessive stalking paid off. She stumbled upon a leaked thread on a prominent paparazzi forum. An anonymous photographer had posted the exact GPS coordinates and details for the wedding of the year. Kendrick and me were getting married that coming Saturday at a massive fortress-like private estate in Malibu. The compound sat on a high cliff overlooking the Pacific Ocean, completely surrounded by high security walls and private gates. "I found it," Sylvia announced, holding the tablet up triumphantly. "I know exactly where the ceremony is taking place. We are going." Brittany looked up from her phone, her eyes red and puffy from crying over her ruined marriage. "Mom, we cannot go there," she sniffled. "The legal letter specifically said we have to stay 500 ft away from her property." "We will be arrested." "We will not be arrested," Sylvia declared with absolute unshakable confidence. "Family is family, Brittany. Blood is thicker than some piece of paper drafted by an overpaid lawyer. Naomi is hosting a wedding filled with Hollywood celebrities, tech billionaires, and prominent politicians. Do you really think she's going to cause a massive, embarrassing public scene in front of all those elite guests just to kick her own mother out? Of course not. She cares way too much about her pristine professional image. Once we are inside the gates, she will have no choice but to smile, take pictures with us, and pretend everything is perfect. We just need to look the part." Sylvia immediately took control of their delusion. She scraped together the absolute last remaining funds from her final credit card to rent transportation. She could not afford a luxury black car service, so she settled for a cheap, outdated white stretch limousine from a budget rental company. She forced Richard to put on his rented tuxedo from Brittany's disastrous wedding. The fabric was stiff and smelled faintly of mothballs, but Sylvia insisted he looked like a wealthy patriarch. She made Brittany squeeze back into a cheap formal dress they had purchased on clearance. Brittany spent 2 hours aggressively contouring her face with makeup, desperately hoping to catch the eye of a wealthy groomsman and replace her runaway husband. Sylvia herself wore a gaudy sequined gown she had bought years ago for a country club dinner she could no longer afford to attend. They piled into the back of the musty-smelling limousine, feeling completely invincible. As the cheap vehicle slowly navigated the winding coastal roads toward Malibu, Sylvia poured herself a glass of cheap sparkling wine from the limo minibar. She smiled out the tinted window, entirely convinced that she was about to outsmart a billionaire and reclaim her golden ticket. They were driving straight into the lion's den, completely blinded by their own arrogant greed. Saturday morning arrived with a gentle ocean breeze sweeping over the high cliffs of Malibu. I was sitting in the center of the massive bridal suite at our private estate, looking out through the floor-to-ceiling glass windows. Below me, the Pacific Ocean crashed rhythmically against the jagged coastal rocks. The entire compound was an absolute fortress of tranquility. Thousands of imported white orchids cascaded from the vatted ceilings of the outdoor pavilion where we would soon exchange our vows. For the first time in my entire life, my mind was completely quiet. There was no screaming. There were no impossible demands for money. There was no sister throwing a massive temper tantrum over a wilted flower. My glam squad worked in absolute professional silence. They meticulously pinned up my hair and applied my makeup with the precision of true artists. I did not have a loud, toxic bridal party surrounding me because I had chosen to only surround myself with people who genuinely brought peace to my life. I was sipping a glass of freshly pressed green juice when the heavy oak door to the suite softly clicked open. Kendrick stepped into the room and my breath caught in my throat. He was already dressed in his custom-tailored black tuxedo. He looked incredibly handsome, powerfully built, and entirely at ease. He carried a quiet, untouchable authority that commanded the room the second he entered. He offered a warm, polite smile to my styling team and quietly asked them to give us a few minutes alone. The team immediately nodded, packed up their brushes, and stepped out into the hallway, gently closing the door behind them. Kendrick walked over and stood behind my velvet chair, resting his large, warm hands softly on my bare shoulders. Our eyes met in the vanity mirror. We just stayed like that for a long moment, absorbing the massive reality of the day. "We really did it," he said, his deep voice filling the quiet room. "We built our own world." I reached up and covered his hand with mine. "It is beautiful," I whispered. Kendrick walked around the chair and offered me his hand. I took it, and he gently pulled me up. My custom silk gown hung flawlessly on a mannequin in the corner waiting for me. We walked over to the massive glass windows looking down at the incredible venue taking shape below us. Workers were putting the final touches on the crystal aisle that stretched out over the infinity pool. Security personnel in sharp black suits were stationed at every perimeter, scanning the grounds with military precision. You know, when I was working 18-hour shifts in those sweltering commercial kitchens, I used to dream about a day like this. I told him, resting my head against his chest. But I never actually thought I would get here. I spent so much time giving every ounce of my energy and every dollar I earned to people who secretly despised me. I thought that was just my role in life. I thought I was supposed to carry their burdens forever. Kendrick wrapped his arms around my waist, holding me close. "That is exactly what leeches want you to believe," he replied, his tone hardening slightly. "When I was building my tech company and producing my first major records in my 20s, I had dozens of people doing the exact same thing to me. People I thought were my brothers tried to drain my bank accounts the second my first software patent sold. They called me selfish when I finally cut them off. They tried to make me feel guilty for succeeding while they refused to work. But building an empire means you have to build a fortress to protect it. You cannot bring dead weight to the top of the mountain, Naomi. You have to leave them at the bottom." He was absolutely right. We had both clawed our way to the absolute peak of our respective industries while carrying the heavy parasitic weight of toxic people. We had both been used, manipulated, and taken for granted by the people who were supposed to protect us. But today was not about them. Today was about celebrating the empire we had built together and the beautiful, peaceful life we had fiercely protected. I tilted my head up and Kendrick leaned down to kiss me. It was a perfect, quiet moment of total alignment. We were completely untouchable. Suddenly, a sharp burst of static crackled from the heavy black two-way radio resting on the marble coffee table. The abrupt noise shattered the peaceful silence of the suite. Kendrick pulled away slightly, his brow furrowing. He walked over and picked up the radio. "Go ahead," he commanded. The voice of our head of security, a highly trained former Navy SEAL, came through the speaker, crisp and entirely serious. "Mr. Kendrick, we have a situation at the main gate." A rented white limousine just pulled up to the perimeter, blocking the entrance. "We have 3 hostile targets inside claiming to be the parents and the sister of the bride. They are demanding immediate entry." Kendrick did not flinch when the radio crackled with the terrifying news that my family had actually shown up. He simply reached out, picked up the heavy black device, and pressed the transmission button. "Handle the situation exactly as we discussed." He instructed, his voice completely calm and devoid of any stress. "Do not let them pass the perimeter under any circumstances. Keep the press back, but let them document the interaction if they choose to." He set the radio down and looked at me with a reassuring smile. Down at the base of the massive cliff, the scene was rapidly deteriorating into absolute chaos. The outdated white stretch limousine sputtered slightly as it idled near the bottom of the steep private driveway, completely blocking the designated lane for arriving guests. The vehicle was a massive eyesore. It was surrounded by a fleet of sleek black Maybach, custom Rolls-Royces, and heavily armored SUVs carrying tech billionaires and Hollywood royalty. But my mother was completely blind to the embarrassing contrast. To Sylvia, this cheap rented limousine was her grand chariot. Outside the massive wrought iron gates, a true media circus was unfolding. Because Kendrick was a highly influential music producer and a titan of the tech industry, the perimeter of our estate was completely swarming with paparazzi. Dozens of photographers and aggressive reporters from major entertainment networks and gossip blogs were camped securely behind velvet ropes and steel barricades. The continuous burst of bright white flashbulbs illuminated the coastal highway like a strobe light. Inside the musty-smelling cabin of the limo, Sylvia was practically vibrating with pure excitement. She peered through the tinted glass, watching the cameras flash as a famous pop star exited a nearby vehicle. "Look at all of this, Richard," she gasped, gripping her cheap sequin purse tightly. "The media is everywhere. They know we are arriving. They know we are the family of the bride." She reached over and aggressively mashed the button on the door panel. The tinted window slowly hummed downward, letting the salty ocean breeze mix with the faint smell of engine exhaust. Sylvia leaned her head and shoulders out of the window. A massive artificial smile plastered across her face. She raised her hand and began waving at the crowd of photographers, exactly like a member of a royal family greeting her loyal subjects. Brittany immediately scrambled across the sticky leather seats, shoving her father aside so she could lean out the window right next to her mother. Brittany aggressively adjusted her low-cut clearance rack dress and pouted her lips desperately, hoping one of the cameras would capture her good side and instantly make her famous. "Drive us up to the entrance," Sylvia commanded, tapping her manicured nails against the glass partition, separating them from the hired driver. "Do not just sit here in the street. Take us all the way up to the front doors." The nervous driver put the vehicle in gear and slowly edged the massive white boat of a car toward the highly secured entrance. But before the front bumper could even get within 10 ft of the iron gates, two heavily armed private security guards stepped squarely into the middle of the road. They were dressed in all-black tactical suits, wearing dark sunglasses and coiled earpieces. They both raised their hands in a firm, unmistakable gesture to halt. The driver instantly slammed on the brakes, causing Sylvia and Brittany to jolt forward in their seats. Sylvia let out an exasperated sigh, completely offended that anyone would dare impede her grand entrance. She leaned further out the window, glaring aggressively at the two stoic guards. "What on earth is the delay?" she shouted, her shrill voice cutting through the ambient noise of the highway. "Open these gates right now. I am the mother of the bride." The moment she screamed those words, the entire atmosphere outside the gates drastically shifted. The paparazzi who had been focused on a tech executive walking through the pedestrian checkpoint suddenly whipped their heads around. A reporter from a notorious celebrity gossip site shouted loudly to the crowd, "Did she just say she is the mother of the bride?" Instantly, a massive swarm of photographers abandoned their current targets and rushed toward the barricades nearest the cheap white limo. A tidal wave of blinding camera flashes erupted perfectly, illuminating my mother's furious face and my sister's desperate poses. Sylvia absolutely ate up the attention. She puffed out her chest, adjusting her gaudy sequined gown, relishing the feeling of dozens of lenses pointed directly at her. "Yes, I am Naomi's mother," she announced loudly to the flashing cameras. "We are here for the wedding." The heavy iron gates remained completely locked, but a small side door opened, and the head of security walked out onto the pavement. The former Navy SEAL moved with a terrifying fluid grace, entirely unfazed by the screaming reporters and the blinding lights. He walked straight down the center of the driveway directly toward the open window of the limousine. He was holding a sleek digital iPad in his left hand. Sylvia saw him approaching and smirked victoriously at Richard. "You see," she boasted. "I told you they would send someone important to escort us inside. Family is family." The security chief stopped exactly 2 feet from her window. He did not smile. He did not offer a polite greeting. He looked down at the glowing screen of his iPad, tapped a single button, and then looked my mother dead in the eyes. "Ma'am, you are on the permanently banned list." The words hung in the salty ocean air like a heavy stone. Sylvia stared at the towering security chief, completely unable to process what he had just said. Her brain simply short-circuited. She opened and closed her mouth a few times, resembling a fish gasping for water before her deep-seated entitlement finally kicked back in. She slammed her hand against the outside of the limousine door and shrieked that there must be some kind of clerical error. She demanded that he go inside and fetch Naomi immediately. She yelled that she was the mother of the bride and that nobody had the authority to ban her from her own daughter's wedding. But before the security chief could even reiterate his warning, the heavy passenger door of the cheap white limousine violently swung open. Brittany had officially run out of patience. She stepped out onto the pristine paved driveway, and it was an absolute visual disaster. In the harsh, unforgiving daylight of the California coast, her clearance rack formal dress looked even cheaper than it had in the dark apartment. The fabric was wrinkled, and her aggressively contoured makeup looked muddy and desperate under the sudden explosion of blinding camera flashes. She stumbled slightly on her discount heels, but quickly caught her balance, marching forward with an unwarranted sense of supreme authority. "Do you have any idea who you are dealing with?" Brittany screamed at the top of her lungs, pointing a shaking, manicured finger directly at the former Navy SEAL. "I am the sister of the bride. We share the same blood. We are VIP guests, and you are just the hired help." You are going to open those iron gates right now, or I will personally make sure my billionaire brother-in-law fires you and ruins your pathetic career." The reaction from the paparazzi was instantaneous and utterly ruthless. The moment Britney stepped out of the vehicle and started screaming, the reporters realized this was not just a minor traffic dispute. This was pure, unadulterated reality television unfolding right in front of their lenses. Dozens of photographers violently shoved each other out of the way, pressing their heavy cameras against the steel barricades to get a better angle. The rapid-fire clicking of camera shutters sounded like a swarm of aggressive insects. The reporters began shouting questions over the chaos, completely fueling Britney's toxic fire. "Are you the sister whose husband just filed for an annulment?" One paparazzi yelled from the crowd. "Is it true your family is facing foreclosure?" Another reporter shouted, shoving a microphone over the velvet rope. Hearing her deepest humiliations broadcasted loudly in front of the world completely shattered whatever tiny shred of sanity Britney had left. Her face contorted into a mask of pure feral rage. She ignored the reporters and focused all of her blinding anger on the stoic security chief blocking her path. She stomped forward entirely, closing the distance between them. "Move out of my way right now," Britney shrieked. When the guard remained perfectly still, acting as an immovable human wall, Britney did the unthinkable. She actually raised her hands and tried to physically shove the massive, heavily armed professional out of her way. It was a completely absurd and humiliating display. Pushing him was like trying to shove a solid brick wall. The security chief did not even stumble. He did not break a sweat. He simply raised his massive hands, caught her wrists with effortless precision, and firmly pushed her back, creating a safe distance between them. "Ma'am, if you touch me again, you will be immediately detained and turned over to the local authorities for assault," the security chief stated, his voice booming with terrifying authority. Richard finally scrambled out of the limousine to protect his golden child. He looked absolutely ridiculous standing in the bright sunlight, wearing a musty-smelling rented tuxedo that was entirely too tight around his waist. He tried to puff out his chest and yell at the guards, but the sheer magnitude of the armed security presence and the blinding wall of paparazzi flashes immediately made him shrink back in absolute terror. Sylvia was still leaning out the window of the cheap limo, screaming completely incoherent insults at everyone in sight. They looked like absolute clowns performing a pathetic circus act for the amusement of the Hollywood press. The security chief realized that reasoning with these deeply delusional individuals was entirely pointless. They were not going to leave quietly, but he was perfectly prepared for this exact scenario. Kendrick had given him very specific instructions on how to handle a public disturbance at the gates. The guard took a deliberate step back from my screaming family. He raised his digital iPad and calmly swiped his finger across the glowing screen, navigating to a specific audio file we had prepared days in advance. He looked up at my mother, who was still shrieking from the limo window, and then he tapped the play button. Instantly, the massive outdoor speaker system attached to the roof of the stone guardhouse cracked to life. The heavy bass of the high-end speakers vibrated through the pavement. An audio recording began to blare loudly enough to completely drown out the crashing ocean waves and the shouting reporters echoing perfectly down the coastal highway for the entire world to hear. The crystal-clear audio cut through the salty air with absolute precision. It was not a muffled recording. It was a high-definition capture of the exact moment my mother had cornered me in that luxury bridal boutique months ago. I had quietly activated the voice memo app on my phone while it sat inside my purse that day, knowing I would eventually need proof of their constant emotional abuse. I never imagined I would use it like this. The heavy bass of the outdoor speakers amplified her venomous tone, making her sound like a cartoon villain, broadcasting her cruelty to the entire California coast. "It is better if you just stay home, Naomi," her recorded voice sneered, dripping with deep disgust. "You would completely ruin the atmosphere. Donovan comes from real money. We cannot have you showing up looking like the hired help and embarrassing your sister. You should just stay home and be a hired cook." The recording stopped for 3 agonizing seconds. The entire perimeter outside the massive iron gates was completely silent. The crashing ocean waves seemed to pause. Even the rapid-fire clicking of the camera shutters briefly halted. Sylvia stood frozen halfway out the window of the cheap white limousine. Her mouth was slightly open, but no sound came out. The blood completely drained from her face, leaving her looking pale and terrified under the harsh California sun. she slowly realized what had just happened. Her ultimate nightmare had manifested in real time. Her perfectly crafted public image as the loving, supportive matriarch had just been entirely incinerated in front of the most aggressive media outlets in the world. Brittany, who had just been screaming and trying to physically push the security chief, completely dropped her arms. Her aggressive posture vanished instantly. She took a slow, terrified step backward, her cheap, discount dress rustling against the pavement. She looked at the crowd of reporters and then looked back at her mother, pure panic shining in her eyes. They were caught. There was no spinning this. There was no manipulating the narrative. The undeniable proof of their cruelty had just been played over a loudspeaker for everyone to hear. Then the paparazzi erupted. It was not just a few questions being shouted. It was a massive tidal wave of aggressive journalistic fury. The reporters instantly connected the dots. They realized that the people standing in front of them were not innocent family members being excluded from a billionaire wedding. They were the toxic, abusive relatives who had treated the bride like garbage when they thought she was broke. Several reporters were already live streaming the event to hundreds of thousands of viewers on social media. The humiliation was instantaneous and permanent. Did you ban your own daughter from her sister's wedding? A reporter from a major entertainment network screamed, shoving a heavy camera lens directly toward Sylvia's face. You called a billionaire CEO a hired cook. Another paparazzi yelled, laughing mockingly at the sheer absurdity of the statement. Is that why you are riding in a cheap rented limo today while she is getting married in a $15 million estate? Are you trying to crash the wedding because you need money? A third voice shouted from the crowd, perfectly hitting the deepest insecurity my family possessed. The camera flashes intensified, transforming into a blinding, continuous strobe light that physically hurt to look at. The media smelled blood in the water, and they were absolutely relentless. They captured every single angle of Sylvia's terrified paralysis. They photographed Brittany, desperately trying to cover her face with her hands as she scrambled backward toward the open door of the limousine. They recorded Richard cowering in the back seat, looking completely pathetic in his tight, musty, smelling rented tuxedo. They had come here expecting to force their way into my high society life. They had genuinely believed that their presence would force me to submit to their demands to avoid a public scandal. Instead, they had walked directly into a perfectly orchestrated trap that exposed their true nature to the entire globe. Sylvia finally managed to pull her head back inside the limousine, her entire body shaking violently. "Roll up the window," she shrieked at the bewildered driver, hitting the door panel frantically. "Roll it up right now. Get us out of here." But the driver was completely boxed in by the swarming press and the security barricades. They were trapped inside the cheap, musty vehicle, completely surrounded by the suffocating reality of their own public destruction. The security chief did not smile. He did not show an ounce of pity for the terrified people cowering inside the car. He had seen enough toxic behavior in his career to know exactly what kind of people he was dealing with. He casually lowered his digital iPad and stepped right up to the glass of the limousine window. He leaned down, looking directly into Sylvia's panicked eyes. The heavy camera lenses of the paparazzi captured his perfectly stoic profile as he delivered the final devastating blow. "The hired cook requests you leave her property immediately," he said, his voice hard and completely uncompromising. The cheap white limousine finally managed to throw itself into reverse. The tires squealed aggressively against the pavement as the panicked driver desperately navigated backward through the massive sea of shouting paparazzi. Sylvia rolled up the tinted window with trembling hands, but it was far too late. The permanent damage was already done. In the modern age of digital media, it does not take hours for a scandal of this magnitude to break. It takes mere minutes. Before the limousine even reached the bottom of the winding coastal highway, the raw, unedited footage of their humiliating rejection was uploaded to every major social media platform in existence. Entertainment journalists immediately posted high-definition clips of the security chief delivering his devastating final line. On social media platforms, savvy creators instantly got to work. They took the pristine audio recording of my mother calling me a hired cook and spliced it directly over the high-resolution video of her terrified face cowering in the back of the rented limo. They zoomed in on Brittany's cheap clearance rack dress and aggressively mocked her pathetic attempt to physically shove a trained military professional. They tore apart Richard's poorly fitted musty tuxedo. The contrast between their arrogant entitlement and their absolute powerlessness was completely hypnotic. The internet loves a story of instant karma, and this was the ultimate serving of poetic justice. Millions of people who had never even heard of my family were suddenly deeply invested in our drama, flooding the comment sections with absolute disgust for my parents. While the entire digital world was catching fire over my mother's spectacular public downfall, the atmosphere inside the massive iron gates was completely untouched by the toxic chaos. I had absolutely no idea what had just transpired at the perimeter, and honestly, I did not care. My focus was entirely on the breathtaking reality of my own life. I stepped out of the bridal suite and walked toward the outdoor pavilion. The setup was nothing short of a modern architectural masterpiece. A custom-built transparent glass aisle stretched directly across the surface of a massive infinity pool, creating the stunning illusion that I was walking on water. Thousands of white orchids floated gently on the pristine surface, perfectly mirroring the lush floral arrangements cascading from the vatted wooden ceiling above. The string quartet began playing a beautiful orchestral arrangement of a classic soul song, perfectly setting the romantic mood for the evening. I took a deep breath, feeling the warm coastal sun on my skin, and began my walk down the aisle. The guest list, seated on either side of the glass runway, was a veritable who is who of global influence. There were legendary film directors, platinum-selling recording artists, and powerful titans of the tech industry. But as I walked past them, I did not see their incredible wealth or their massive fame. I only saw the man waiting for me at the end of the aisle. Kendrick stood under the towering floral archway, looking absolutely magnificent. The evening sun caught the gold accents on his custom black tuxedo, but his dark eyes were completely locked on me. There was a depth of love and absolute certainty in his gaze that instantly washed away every single ounce of trauma I had ever endured at the hands of my relatives. I was no longer the family scapegoat. I was no longer the walking ATM who existed solely to fund their delusions. I was a fiercely successful woman stepping into a powerful partnership built on genuine mutual respect. When I finally reached the altar, Kendrick gently took both of my hands in his large, warm palms. He did not care about the cameras documenting the event or the high-profile guests watching us. In that exact moment, we were the only two people in the entire world. The officiant delivered a beautiful ceremony speaking passionately about the power of building a foundation on unwavering trust and loyalty. We exchanged our vows, speaking quietly and honestly to one another about the empires we had built from scratch and the profound peace we had finally found together. There were no drunken temper tantrums. There was no wilted decor and no toxic relatives trying to steal the spotlight to mask their own failures. It was absolute flawless perfection. But the profound irony of the universe was actively working its magic in the background. At the exact second, I looked deep into Kendrick's eyes and confidently spoke the words, "I do." The internet completely broke. Across the globe, millions of smartphones refreshed their feeds simultaneously. The viral clips of my family being denied entry had skyrocketed past 50 million views. The court of public opinion had fiercely rallied behind the hired cook. As Kendrick pulled me in for our first kiss as husband and wife, the digital algorithms officially crowned their new reigning topics. The hashtags Toxic Family and Naomi Revenge had officially claimed the #1 and #2 trending spots, globally cementing my family's ultimate destruction in the annals of internet history forever. While the digital world raged, and my blood relatives sat trapped in their rented nightmare on the coastal highway. The atmosphere inside the Malibu estate transitioned seamlessly into an evening of unparalleled elegance. The reception took place under a massive custom-built glass marquee that allowed the guests to dine directly beneath the starry California sky. Soft amber lighting illuminated the long banquet tables, which were draped in heavy imported silk and adorned with cascading white floral centerpieces. Waiters in immaculate white coats glided silently across the floor, carrying silver trays of vintage champagne and delicate hors d'oeuvres. It was a universe away from the humid, smelly community center where my sister had thrown her drunken temper tantrum just days prior. Here there was only joy, genuine laughter, and the sophisticated hum of true celebration. Kendrick, being a titan in the music industry, had naturally curated an entertainment lineup that rivaled an exclusive awards show. A legendary Grammy-winning rhythm and blues singer took the stage to perform our first dance live, and the smooth, soulful melody echoed beautifully out over the crashing ocean waves. As we swayed together on the polished marble dance floor, I looked over Kendrick's broad shoulder and caught the eye of his mother. She was sitting at the head table, wiping away a happy tear, while his father smiled proudly beside her. Kendrick's parents had never once judged me for my background. They did not care about social climbing or exploiting my wealth. From the very first day we met, they had embraced me with a warmth and sincerity I had never experienced in my own home. They showed me what unconditional love actually looked like, and they treated me like their own daughter long before there was a ring on my finger. As the multi-course dinner service officially began, Kendrick tapped his crystal glass with a silver spoon, bringing the massive room to a gentle hush. He took the microphone and thanked everyone for coming before turning his absolute focus to me. He delivered a toast so deeply moving, so fiercely protective and loving that it left not a single dry eye in the marquee. He spoke about my resilience, my brilliant mind, and the empire I had built with my bare hands. When he finished, the applause was deafening. He kissed my forehead, handed the microphone to me, and stepped back, giving me the floor. I stood at the center of the room, looking out at the faces of my incredibly supportive friends, my loyal culinary team, and Kendrick's wonderful family. I took a deep breath, feeling completely grounded and entirely free. Thank you all for being here tonight. I began, my voice steady and clear, echoing perfectly through the glass pavilion. Growing up, I was always taught that family was strictly defined by blood. I was led to believe that you had to endure whatever treatment you were given simply because of the people you happened to be born to. I was taught to shrink myself so others could feel big. But standing here looking at all of you, I know with absolute certainty that is a lie. Family is not biology. Family is mutual respect. It is the people who celebrate your victories instead of being threatened by them. It is the people who stand by you when you have absolutely nothing to offer them but your authentic self. I turned slightly to look directly at my new in-laws. To Kendrick's family, thank you for welcoming me with open arms and showing me the grace I spent my entire life searching for. You are my true family now, and I am incredibly honored to carry your name. The guests smiled warmly, and a soft murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. I looked down at the meticulously plated first course sitting in front of them. It was a delicate pan-seared sea bass with a complex truffle reduction perfectly presented on custom porcelain. I had personally designed the entire 5-course menu for this evening, but I have a confession to make about the meal you are about to eat. I continued, a small nostalgic smile playing on my lips. Every single dish served tonight was not recently created in my Michelin star kitchens. These are the exact recipes I invented years ago when I was just a teenager. Whenever my relatives hosted their fancy dinner parties to impress their wealthy friends, they would banish me to the kitchen telling me my presence was too embarrassing for their high society guests. So I spent those lonely nights standing over a hot stove perfecting my craft in absolute isolation. The food you are eating tonight is the exact same food they routinely threw in the garbage because it was made by the family outcast. And now those very recipes are the foundation of a billion-dollar hospitality empire. The morning after my flawless wedding was a beautiful, peaceful Sunday for Kendrick and me. But on the other side of Los Angeles, my parents and my sister woke up to an absolute living nightmare. The cheap rented limousine had dropped them off at their heavily mortgaged suburban home late Saturday night. They had crawled into their beds utterly defeated, hoping the digital storm would miraculously blow over by morning. Instead, it had evolved into a massive Category 5 hurricane. Sylvia woke up to the sound of heavy diesel engines idling and loud voices shouting just outside her bedroom window. She practically ripped the curtains open and gasped in pure horror. Her manicured front lawn was completely destroyed. 4 massive local news vans were parked illegally across the curb. At least 30 aggressive paparazzi were camped out on the grass, drinking coffee and aiming their heavy telephoto lenses directly at her living room windows. The moment they saw Sylvia peeking through the curtains, a blinding wave of camera flashes erupted in the bright morning sunlight. Reporters began shouting her name through heavy megaphones, demanding a public statement about why she called her billionaire daughter a hired cook. Sylvia dropped the curtains and backed away, hyperventilating. She was officially a prisoner in her own home. The humiliation extended far beyond the media. The noise had drawn the attention of the entire suburban neighborhood. Sylvia watched in absolute agony as her next-door neighbors, the very people she had spent years trying to impress at country club luncheons, stood on their porches, looking on with complete unfiltered disgust. Several neighbors were actually giving impromptu interviews to the reporters on the sidewalk. They eagerly exposed my mother's long history of extreme arrogance and completely validated the toxic family narrative. The community she had desperately tried to rule over had instantly and completely excommunicated her. Richard stumbled into the bedroom looking like a ghost. He had not slept a single minute. He was holding his cell phone with a trembling hand, staring blankly at the screen. His phone had been ringing nonstop since 6:00 in the morning, but the most recent call was the final nail in his coffin. It was his regional manager calling from the corporate office. Overnight, internet sleuths had easily tracked down Richard's exact place of employment. In a matter of hours, the company's social media pages had been flooded with tens of thousands of angry comments demanding his termination. People were leaving vicious one-star reviews threatening a massive boycott if the company continued to employ an abusive father. His manager did not ask for his side of the story. The corporate world does not care about family drama. It only cares about the bottom line. Richard was informed that his employment was terminated, effective immediately due to a severe violation of their morality clause. He was ordered not to return to the building and told that his personal belongings would be mailed to him in a cardboard box. In a single phone call, Richard had lost his mid-level corporate salary, his health insurance, and his only remaining source of income. They were already facing foreclosure, and now they had absolutely zero means to pay even a fraction of their bills. Brittany came stomping down the hallway completely hysterical. She was clutching her smartphone like a lifeline, but every time she looked at the screen, she burst into a fresh wave of sobbing. Her social media accounts, which she had desperately tried to build into a glamorous influencer lifestyle, were completely overrun by hundreds of thousands of hate comments. People were mocking her cheap dress, her pathetic attempt to push the security guard, and her completely ruined wedding. She tried to aggressively delete the comments, but they were appearing faster than her thumbs could move. She was the most hated woman on the internet. "Mom, you have to do something," Brittany shrieked, pacing the hallway. "Call the police and make those photographers leave. Call Naomi and beg her to make a public statement. My life is completely over." Before Sylvia could even attempt to calm her screaming golden child, a sharp, aggressive knock echoed from the heavy wooden front door. Richard slowly walked downstairs and peeked through the peephole. It was not a reporter. It was a man in a sharp suit holding a thick legal folder flanked by 2 local police officers to help him safely navigate through the aggressive mob of paparazzi on the lawn. Richard opened the door just a crack. The man shoved the thick envelope through the narrow opening, looking directly past my father to lock eyes with my sister standing at the bottom of the stairs. "Brittany, you have been officially served," the man stated loudly over the screaming press. Brittany tore open the envelope with violently shaking hands. She pulled out the crisp legal documents, and her knees completely buckled. Donovan had officially filed for an immediate legal annulment. The paperwork explicitly cited severe financial fraud and intentional deception as the primary grounds for the dissolution of their one-day marriage. He had already frozen their joint accounts and legally separated himself from her toxic mess. Brittany dropped the papers onto the hardwood floor, completely paralyzed by the reality of her situation. She had no husband, no wealthy in-laws, and a completely ruined public reputation. Worst of all, she was now entirely alone to face the crushing, suffocating weight of her $80,000 secret credit card debt. The suffocating reality of the annulment papers lying on the hardwood floor finally broke whatever fragile delusion Brittany had left. She sat entirely paralyzed while the muffled shouts of the paparazzi continued to echo from the front lawn. Her mother was hyperventilating in the kitchen, and her father was staring blankly at the wall, having just lost his entire career. There was absolutely no one left to save her. The $80,000 mountain of secret credit card debt was entirely hers to carry, and without Donovan's wealthy family to absorb the financial blow, she was facing total bankruptcy at 30 years old. Desperation completely consumed her. Brittany scrambled off the floor, leaving the legal documents scattered across the wood, and sprinted upstairs to her childhood bedroom. She grabbed her laptop and aggressively opened her messaging apps. She tried calling my personal cell phone, but the automated voice immediately informed her the number was unavailable. She tried sending text messages, but they instantly bounced back as undelivered. She logged into every single social media platform trying to send me direct messages, but her accounts had been entirely restricted. I had placed a permanent digital iron curtain between us, but sheer panic is a powerful motivator. Brittany realized she could not reach me through any of her known accounts, so she quickly opened a web browser and created a brand new anonymous email address. Her fingers trembled violently as she typed out my private business email, which she had memorized years ago when she used to forward me links to expensive designer bags she wanted me to buy for her. She spent the next hour drafting a massive, frantic email. She poured every ounce of her manipulative energy into the text, desperately trying to strike a chord of sympathy. "Naomi, please do not delete this." She typed her tears splashing directly onto the keyboard. "I am begging you on my hands and knees. Donovan just served me with annulment papers. He left me because of some credit card debt I accumulated while trying to plan a wedding that would make Mom and Dad proud. You know how much pressure they put on us to be perfect." I was just so stressed and I made some terrible financial mistakes. She did not take a single ounce of genuine accountability for her actions. Instead, she aggressively leaned into the ultimate toxic trump card. She tried to use our biology as a weapon. "You have to help me, Naomi." She continued her paragraphs, growing longer and more frantic. "If you just loan me the $80,000, I can pay off the debt today and show Donovan the zero balances. He will come back to me if the money is sorted out. You are a billionaire now. $80,000 is literally nothing to you, but it will save my entire life. We share the same blood, Naomi. We are sisters. You cannot just abandon your own flesh and blood when she is drowning. I promise I will pay you back every single cent. Please remember the good times we had growing up. Do not let them ruin me." She hit send and sat in her dark bedroom, staring at the screen, completely holding her breath. She genuinely believed that reading those desperate words would instantly activate a deeply ingrained sense of familial obligation within me. Thousands of miles away, I was sitting on the polished teak deck of a breathtaking super yacht anchored perfectly in the crystal blue waters of the Amalfi Coast. The Mediterranean sun was warming my skin, and Kendrick was sitting across from me enjoying a fresh cup of espresso. My phone chimed softly on the glass table. I picked it up and saw the notification from an unknown sender. The subject line simply read, "Urgent, please read from Brittany." I opened the email and slowly read through her massive wall of text. The gentle ocean breeze played with my hair as I absorbed every single pathetic, manipulative word she had written. I did not feel a sudden rush of sympathy. I did not feel the familiar heavy guilt that used to control my every decision. I felt absolutely nothing but a cold, profound clarity. She was not apologizing for publicly humiliating me. She was not apologizing for pushing my head of security or screaming insults outside my wedding. She was only apologizing because the golden ticket she had tried to secure had just completely evaporated, and she was staring down the barrel of her own financial ruin. She still viewed me exactly as she always had. I was just a walking ATM machine designed to bail her out of her own toxic consequences. Kendrick noticed the slight shift in my demeanor and raised an eyebrow. "Everything okay, beautiful?" he asked, setting his espresso cup down. "Everything is absolutely perfect," I replied, offering him a warm smile. "I just need to tie up one final loose end." I tapped the reply button on the email. I did not type a long emotional response explaining how deeply she had hurt me. I did not yell or try to justify my boundary. Explaining myself to a narcissist was a complete waste of energy. Instead, I opened my secure digital cloud drive and located a specific file I had scanned months ago. It was the receipt from the luxury boutique on Rodeo Drive. The exact receipt for the $15,000 custom lace bridal gown she had brazenly demanded I pay for after telling me I was not welcome at her wedding. I attached the high-resolution PDF document to the email. The receipt clearly displayed my name as the payer, and right at the very bottom, stamped in bold, unmissable red ink, were two simple words: "No refunds." I left the body of the email completely blank. I pressed send, permanently blocked the new email address, and tossed my phone back onto the table, turning my face up to enjoy the beautiful Italian sun. The silence following my final email was absolute. With no secret wire transfer coming to save her, Brittany finally had to face the suffocating reality of her $80,000 debt. But her financial ruin was only the first domino to fall in the rapid, complete collapse of my family's toxic empire. Without Richard's mid-level corporate salary, their precarious house of cards officially disintegrated. Sylvia, however, absolutely refused to accept defeat. In a deeply delusional attempt to pretend everything was fine, she woke up on a Tuesday morning, put on her best remaining pastel twin set, and drove to the exclusive local country club, where she had spent decades judging other women. She strutted into the formal dining room, expecting the maitre d' to escort her to her usual table by the window. Instead, the moment she stepped onto the plush carpet, the entire room fell dead silent. Women she had gossiped with for years abruptly stopped talking and aggressively turned their backs to her. Nobody waved. Nobody smiled. The heavy, uncomfortable silence was shattered only when the club manager, a man Sylvia used to treat like absolute garbage, walked briskly over to her. He did not offer her a menu. He handed her a small cardboard box containing the contents of her gym locker and a formal sealed letter. He informed her loudly enough for the nearby tables to hear that the board of directors had permanently revoked her membership. He cited the massive media scandal that had brought disgrace to their community and specifically noted her severely delinquent membership dues. Sylvia was forced to turn around and do the ultimate walk of shame back through the lobby, clutching a cardboard box while the elite women of her neighborhood whispered and laughed behind her back. Her social standing, the one thing she valued above her own children, was entirely eradicated. But the humiliation at the country club was nothing compared to the terror waiting for her at home. Because I had completely refused to pay for Brittany's wedding venue, Richard had desperately taken out a second mortgage on their already over-leveraged suburban house to cover the community center, the caterers, and the rented limousines. Now, with no job and his bank accounts entirely frozen, that debt was officially radioactive. The bank did not care about the viral videos or the family drama. They only cared about the missed payments. Exactly 2 months after my wedding, the final foreclosure notices were nailed directly to their heavy mahogany front door. The eviction was swift and absolutely brutal because they could not afford to hire professional movers. My parents and my sister were forced to pack their lives into cardboard boxes themselves, carrying heavy furniture out to a rented budget truck while the entire neighborhood watched from their manicured lawns. They lost the 4-bedroom colonial house with the heated swimming pool. They lost the leased luxury cars, which were promptly repossessed from the driveway. They were forced to move into a tiny, cramped 2-bedroom apartment on the second floor of a run-down building in an undesirable part of the city. The contrast was staggering. The walls were thin, the paint was peeling in the corners, and the ancient plumbing rattled violently every time someone turned on a faucet. Brittany, who had spent her entire life demanding luxury, was now forced to sleep on a cheap mattress in a tiny room with a single window overlooking a busy highway. She spent her days sobbing as she shoved her clearance rack dresses and fake designer handbags into a tiny, cramped closet. The claustrophobia of the three of them trapped together in deep poverty was unbearable. Without me there to act as their emotional punching bag and financial safety net, they completely turned on each other. The tiny apartment echoed with constant, vicious screaming matches as they desperately blamed one another for their total ruin. It was a gloomy, rainy morning when the final crushing blow was delivered. Richard was sitting at a chipped Formica kitchen table, aggressively scanning low-wage job boards on a cracked laptop. Sylvia was sitting on a stained thrift store sofa, eating discount cereal out of a plastic bowl. The cheap television mounted on the thin apartment wall was tuned to a premier national morning talk show simply providing background noise to their miserable existence. Then the bright, cheerful voice of the television host cut through the heavy silence of the room. "Welcome back, America," the host said, smiling brightly into the camera. "Up next, we have an incredibly special guest joining us in the studio. She is a culinary visionary, a self-made billionaire, and arguably the most powerful female CEO in the hospitality industry today. She is here to talk about her massive global expansion and her stunning recent wedding." Sylvia dropped her plastic spoon. The cheap cereal splashed onto the stained cushions, but she did not even notice. Richard slowly looked up from his cracked laptop, his face turning completely pale. The television screen cut to a wide studio shot. I was sitting confidently in the plush guest chair wearing a flawlessly tailored designer suit. I looked incredibly radiant, powerful, and entirely unbothered by the past. The chyron at the bottom of the screen flashed my name in bold letters, introducing me as a titan of industry. My parents and my sister sat frozen in their dingy, cramped apartment, entirely trapped in their own misery, forced to watch the daughter they had thrown away shine on the absolute highest stage in the country. I did not see them watching me that morning. I did not know they were sitting in a cramped, run-down apartment staring at a cheap television screen while I spoke about my global expansion to millions of viewers. And honestly, I did not care. The days of me worrying about their approval or carrying the heavy burden of their financial disasters were entirely over. While they were trapped in the suffocating reality of the consequences they had created for themselves, I was entirely focused on the beautiful future I was building. A few weeks after that television interview, Kendrick and I finally took our official honeymoon. We chartered a breathtaking private super yacht and spent an entire month sailing through the crystal-clear waters of the Mediterranean Sea. There were no frantic text messages demanding money to pay off credit cards. There were no manipulative voicemails trying to guilt-trip me into submission. There were no dramatic public tantrums. For the first time in my 33 years of life, my phone was completely peacefully silent. I spent my days diving into the warm ocean, exploring historic cobblestone streets in coastal Italian towns, and sitting on the polished teak deck at sunset. I drank incredible vintage wine and laughed endlessly with the man who truly loved me and protected my heart. While sitting on the deck of the yacht, our own private chef brought us a stunning multi-course meal. I looked at the beautifully plated food and smiled, remembering all those nights I spent crying alone in my parents' kitchen, perfecting my craft while they entertained guests without me. The pain of my past had literally funded my paradise. Kendrick reached across the table and held my hand, reminding me that we had broken the generational curse forever. We were building a legacy based on kindness, mutual respect, and genuine hard work. I had finally found absolute pure peace. I am sharing this entire journey with you, not to brag about material wealth or to blindly celebrate the downfall of my relatives. I am telling you this story because I know there are so many of you watching right now who are trapped in the exact same vicious cycle of toxic family abuse. You are the one who is always expected to give everything you have. You are the one who is constantly belittled, mocked, and pushed aside while simultaneously being used as a financial or emotional safety net. You are told by society that you have to endure the disrespect simply because you share the same DNA. We are conditioned to believe that cutting off our parents or our siblings is the ultimate unforgivable sin. But let me tell you the absolute undeniable truth. The real sin is allowing toxic people to destroy your mental health and drain your potential just because you happen to share a last name. The most powerful weapon you have against narcissistic, abusive people is not fighting back. It is not yelling at them or trying to prove your worth or begging them to finally see your value. They will never see your value because their own fragile egos depend entirely on keeping you completely beneath them. Your most powerful weapon is your absolute silence. It is your permanent physical absence. When my mother slapped me across the face and threatened to write me out of her completely worthless will, I did not scream back. I simply walked out the door and never looked back. I let my success, my peace, and my ultimate karma make all the loud noise for me. By completely removing myself from their toxic game, I stopped being their shock absorber. I forced them to finally face the reality of their own disastrous choices, and it completely dismantled their false reality. You have to realize that you do not owe anyone your sanity. You do not owe your hard-earned success to the people who treated you like dirt when you were struggling to build it. Walking away is agonizing at first because you are mourning the supportive family you deserved but never actually had. But I promise you that once you step through that initial fire, the freedom waiting for you on the other side is absolutely breathtaking. Blood doesn't make a family, respect, love, and loyalty do. If you have a toxic person draining your life, cut the cord. Have you ever had to walk away from toxic relatives to protect your peace? Tell me your story in the comments. Like and subscribe for more real stories of survival and success. The most profound lesson to take away from this story is that biology does not automatically earn someone a permanent place in your life. For far too long, society has conditioned us to believe that we must unconditionally tolerate disrespect, emotional abuse, and financial exploitation simply because the people hurting us happen to share our blood. We are taught to forgive the unforgivable and to continually pour our energy into bottomless pits of entitlement, all under the guise of family loyalty. But true loyalty should never require you to sacrifice your own mental health or sabotage your hard-earned success. This story serves as a powerful reminder that the ultimate response to toxic manipulation is not found in screaming matches or desperate attempts to prove your worth to those committed to misunderstanding you. The greatest revenge and the purest form of self-preservation is absolute silence combined with an unwavering commitment to building your own brilliant future. When you finally gather the courage to cut the heavy anchor of toxic relationships, you create the necessary space for genuine love, respect, and authentic connections to enter your life. You begin to understand that true family is entirely chosen. It is comprised of the people who celebrate your victories, protect your peace, and value you for exactly who you are rather than what you can endlessly provide for them. Walking away from the people who raised you is undeniably one of the most painful decisions a person can make, but it is often the only path to discovering your true potential and reclaiming your absolute freedom. If you have ever found the courage to establish firm boundaries and walk away from toxic relatives to protect your peace, please share your survival story in the comments below.